I worked as a mapping specialist for the National Park Service for about 3 years. It was mostly boring desk work, honestly. I'd take raw LiDAR data and turn it into those clean trail maps you see at visitor centers. There was one rule that was drilled into us from day one. We were never allowed to publish or even digitally archive maps of what they called the third-level caves. If we found data on them, we had to flag it and move it to a physical drive that a supervisor would take away. They told us it was for safety, like the air quality was bad or the rock was too unstable for the public. I didn't think much of it until I was clearing out an old workstation in the back of the office. I found a folder that someone had forgotten to wipe. It wasn't encrypted or anything. It was just a scan of a hand-drawn map from the 1970s. It showed a tunnel system that didn't just stay in the park. It went way beyond the boundaries. Looking at that old scan, I noticed something weird right away. The map was labeled Third Level Access 4. According to our official files, there were only 3 access points, and they were all sealed with heavy steel grates back in the 90s. But this one was different. The coordinates put it right behind a defunct ranger station that had been closed since the early 2000s. I checked our current satellite overlays, and there was nothing there but dense trees. Honestly, I should have just deleted it and gone to lunch. But I was curious. I've hiked those trails 100 times, and I never saw anything resembling a cave entrance in that area. The map had these little notes scribbled in the margins in pencil. One of them said, "Sound travels up." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I figured it was some geological thing about how the limestone shaped the acoustics. I decided to go out there on my Saturday. It was a Saturday morning when I drove out to the old ranger station. The building was in rough shape. The windows were boarded up and the porch was basically rotting away. I parked my truck about a mile down the road so I wouldn't look like I was trespassing or anything. I had the coordinates pulled up on my phone. I walked through the brush for about 20 minutes. The woods were quiet, Not like scary quiet, just normal woods quiet. I finally reached the spot on the map. There was a large, flat rock covered in moss. It looked totally natural, until I noticed the edges. They were too straight. I cleared away some of the dead leaves and saw a heavy iron ring bolted into the stone. It wasn't a cave entrance. It was a man-made hatch that had been disguised to look like the forest floor. I pulled on the ring, and it didn't even creak. It was well-oiled. I opened the hatch just enough to peek inside. I expected a ladder or maybe some stairs, but it was just a concrete shaft going down about 10 feet. There were metal rungs set into the wall. I used my phone light to see the bottom. It opened up into a wider horizontal passage. I hesitated for a second, thinking about my job and the rules. But honestly, I just wanted to see what the big secret was. I climbed down and hit the floor. The air was surprisingly fresh. It didn't smell like a damp cave at all. It smelled like laundry. That was the first thing that felt off. I started walking down the passage. The walls weren't rough rock. They were smooth, almost like they'd been sanded down. About 50 yards in, I saw a light reflecting off the floor ahead. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a steady, warm glow coming from around a corner. I slowed down. I rounded the corner and stopped dead. The passage opened into a small room. It wasn't a cave chamber. It looked like a break room or something. There was a small folding table, 2 plastic chairs, and a battery-powered lantern sitting in the middle. But the weirdest part was what was on the table. There were 3 neatly stacked sandwiches wrapped in plastic, and a half-finished crossword puzzle. I realized then that someone was living down here, or at least spending a lot of time here. I looked at the crossword. The handwriting was very neat, almost like a draftsman's script. I noticed a pair of sneakers tucked under one of the chairs. They were small, maybe a woman's size 6. I felt like I was intruding on someone's house. Then I heard it. was a sound coming from further down the tunnel. It was the sound of a television. I could hear the faint, muffled voices of a news anchor. I followed the sound of the TV, keeping my back to the wall. The tunnel started to branch off into smaller corridors. Every few feet, there were these small PVC pipes coming down through the ceiling. I remembered the note on the map. Sound travels up. I realized those pipes were positioned directly under the houses in the nearby subdivision. They were listening. Not the government, but whoever was down here. I walked past a room that was filled with old filing cabinets. I peeked inside one of them. It was full of photos. Not photos of the cave, but photos of people in their yards. Most of them were taken from a low angle, like from the ground level. I saw a photo of a family having a barbecue. It was dated last week. My heart started to beat a little faster. I noticed a large map pinned to the back wall of the room. It was a copy of the official NPS map I'd worked on, but it had red circles all over it. I stepped closer to the map on the wall. The red circles weren't cave entrances. They were labeled with names. Miller Residence, the Thompsons, vacant lot on 5th. Each circle had a set of times written next to it. 6 a.m., 11:30 p.m. I realized they were shift schedules. Someone was monitoring these houses from underneath. I looked at the corner of the map and saw a name I recognized. It was my own name. There was a red circle around my apartment complex, which was 3 miles away from the park. Next to my name, it just said, New Specialist. I felt a wave of nausea. That's when the TV sound stopped. Everything went dead quiet. Then I heard the sound of footsteps on the concrete behind me. They weren't running. They were walking slowly, like they knew exactly where I was. I turned around, but the lantern in the other room had been turned off. I didn't wait to see who it was. I turned off my phone light and moved in the opposite direction. I didn't know these tunnels, but I knew the general layout of the park above. I scrambled through a narrow side passage, scraping my shoulders on the rock. I could hear them behind me. Not speaking, just the heavy breathing of someone who's used to the air down there. I saw a glimmer of light from another shaft. I climbed up a rusted ladder as fast as I could. I popped out of a storm drain in the middle of a residential street. I was 3 miles from my truck. I ran all the way to a gas station and called a cab. When I got back to my apartment, my front door was unlocked. I went straight to my bedroom and looked at the floor. My rug had been moved about 6 inches to the left. Underneath it, there was a small circular piece of wood that didn't match the rest of the floorboards. I haven't gone back to work since. I'm staying in a hotel now. I spent about 4 years working as a mapping specialist for the National Park Service out in the Pacific Northwest. Most of my job was just staring at LiDAR data in a windowless office. We had a very specific rule about the third-level caves. We were told they didn't exist on any public-facing maps. If we found a new opening or a deep shaft in that sector, we had to flag it for the special projects team. I just assumed it was a safety thing. The official line was that the rock was too brittle and the air was toxic. But the weird part was the way my supervisor, Greg, would react whenever I brought it up. He'd get real quiet and just tell me to do my job. He wasn't being mean, he just looked tired. One afternoon, I was processing a flyover scan from the northern ridge. I noticed a geometric shape on the screen. It wasn't a rock or a tree. It was a perfectly straight line about 30 feet long. I zoomed in on that straight line, thinking it was a glitch in the software. Usually when the LiDAR hits a power line or a fence, it looks a certain way. This was different. It looked like a flat, concrete slab tucked under a ledge. I checked the coordinates against our third-level restricted list. It wasn't on there. This was in a section of the park that was supposed to be completely untouched. I mean, honestly, I should have just flagged it like I was told. But I decided to look at some older files first. I went into the archives and found a folder from a guy who had my job back in the 80s. His name was Miller. He had left the NPS pretty abruptly. There was a sticky note on the back of one of his physical maps. It just had a phone number and a single word: ventilation. I looked at the map he'd drawn by hand. It showed the third level wasn't a cave system at all. Miller's hand-drawn map was incredibly detailed. It showed a series of interconnected rooms that spanned miles. He hadn't used geological symbols. He used architectural ones. Doors, stairwells, and what looked like elevator shafts. I remember feeling this weird pit in my stomach. Why would there be a massive underground facility in the middle of a protected wilderness area? And why was the NPS hiding it? I decided to call the number on the sticky note. It was a local area code. A woman answered on the third ring. I asked for Miller. She was quiet for a long time. And then she said, "He hasn't lived here in 20 years." I asked if she knew where he went. She said he went to work one morning and just never came home. The Park Service told her he probably fell into a sinkhole. They never found his body. I hung up the phone and looked back at my screen. That weekend, I told my girlfriend I was going on a solo hike. I packed my gear and headed to the northern ridge. I didn't take the official trails. I used the GPS coordinates I'd pulled from the LiDAR scan. The terrain was rough. There was a lot of steep climbs and thick brush. After about 3 hours, I found the spot. It was exactly where the scan said it would be. There was a large rock overhang, and underneath it was that concrete slab. But it wasn't just a slab. It was a heavy-duty industrial door. It was painted a dull forest green to blend in, but the paint was peeling. I noticed a small vent nearby. I put my hand over it. I could feel warm, filtered air blowing out. It didn't smell like a cave. It smelled like a server room, like hot plastic and ozone. There was no handle on the door, just a small glass panel for a keypad. The glass panel was dead. It looked like it hadn't been powered on in years. I walked around the edge of the slab looking for another way in. About 20 yards away, I found a hollowed-out cedar tree. At first it looked like a normal dead tree, but when I touched the bark, it felt like fiberglass. I pushed on a loose piece of wood, and the whole side of the tree swung open. Inside was a metal ladder leading straight down. I knew I should have turned around right then. This was way beyond geological instability. But I kept thinking about Miller. I put on my headlamp and started climbing down. The ladder went down deep. I must have gone at least 50 feet. When my boots finally hit the floor, I realized I was in a long white corridor. It looked like a hospital hallway, but without the doors. There were humongous bundles of fiber optic cables running along the ceiling. I started walking down the hallway. The only sound was the low hum of the ventilation. The air was incredibly dry. After a few minutes, I reached a heavy steel door that was cracked open. I nudged it with my foot. Inside was a massive room filled with rows and rows of server racks. Thousands of little green and blue lights were blinking in the quiet. I noticed a desk at the far end of the room. There was a single monitor that was still on. I walked over to it. The screen was showing a live feed. It wasn't a feed of the park. It was a grid of about 20 different cameras. I realized I was looking into the interiors of the ranger stations. I saw the main office where I worked. I saw Greg sitting at his desk. He was staring at his phone. But then I saw a camera labeled Apartment 4B. That was my apartment. I saw my girlfriend sitting on her couch.
I stood there, completely frozen. The camera in my apartment was high up, probably hidden in the smoke detector. I watched as she got up to get a glass of water. I felt sick. This wasn't a mapping project. This was a total surveillance hub for every employee in the park. I looked at the other monitors. There were folders labeled with everyone's names. I clicked on the one with my name on it. It contained a log of every website I'd visited and every person I'd called. Then I saw a folder titled Miller, J. I opened it. There was a video file from 20 years ago. It showed Miller sitting at this exact desk. He looked panicked. He was trying to copy files onto a floppy disk. Then, the door behind him opened. 2 men in plain gray uniforms walked in. They didn't say anything. They just grabbed him by the arms and pulled him out of the frame.
I heard a soft chime from the hallway. It was the sound of an elevator arriving. I didn't think, I just ran. I didn't go back toward the ladder. I followed a sign that said emergency exit. It led to a long flight of stairs that came out inside the basement of the visitor center. I burst through the door and ran straight to my truck. I didn't even go home. I drove 3 hours to my brother's house in the next state. I called my girlfriend from a burner phone and told her to meet me at a diner. I haven't been back to the park. I sent my resignation by mail. The weirdest part happened yesterday. I got a package at my brother's place. There was no return address. Inside was a brand new map of the park. My brother's house was circled in red. And in the corner, in that neat script, it said, "We're updating the files." I don't think I'm safe anywhere.
I worked as a mapping specialist for the National Park Service back in 2018. It was a pretty standard government gig, honestly. I spent most of my days in a windowless office, updating topographical data for the Appalachians. There was one rule that everyone followed without question. We were told to never digitize, or even talk about the physical maps labeled third level. The supervisor said it was a matter of public safety. I assumed they meant geological instability, or some kind of old mining hazard that wasn't worth the paperwork. But those maps were kept in a high-security safe that required a physical key. One night, a massive storm knocked out the power to the entire facility. The electronic override failed, and for some reason, the safe door just swung open. I was the only one in the office, finishing a late project. I walked over and pulled a drawer. It wasn't a cave map. It was a blueprint for a suburban neighborhood located 200 feet underground. Looking at those blueprints was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced in that job. It showed a cul-de-sac with 6 identical houses, but according to the cross-section, they were all encased in a giant limestone cavern. There were notes scribbled in the margins about atmospheric simulation and artificial light cycles. I mean, it looked like someone was trying to build a perfect 1950s neighborhood in a hole. I noticed a set of coordinates written in red ink on the corner of the page. It pointed to a spot near the Blackwood Creek Trail. I knew that area like the back of my hand. It was just a dense patch of pines and an old abandoned ranger station that had been closed since the 50s. The map showed a service entrance hidden inside a storage shed on the surface. I memorized the numbers and put the map back right before the lights flickered back on. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept wondering why the NPS was hiding a town. The drive to Blackwood Creek the next morning took about an hour. It was one of those gray, foggy mornings where everything looks a bit muted. I parked my truck near the trailhead and started hiking. The woods were thick, and the ground was still muddy from the storm. I found the old ranger station after about 20 minutes. It was just a rotting wooden cabin with a collapsed roof and some rusted tools lying around. I walked around the back, pushing through the overgrowth to find the storage shed. I eventually spotted a small corrugated metal building tucked into the trees. It was covered in dead vines and looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. There was a heavy padlock on the door, but the wood around the frame was soft. I used a crowbar from my pack to pop the door open. It didn't lead to a tool shed. There was just a clean stainless steel elevator door sitting in the middle of the dirt floor. I stood there for a long time, just staring at that elevator. It felt so out of place in the middle of a national forest. I pressed the call button, not really expecting it to work. But then I heard a faint whirring sound coming from deep beneath my boots. The floor of the shed started to vibrate. A few seconds later, the doors slid open with a soft electronic chime. The inside of the elevator was surprisingly bright. It had white fluorescent lights and a clean beige carpeted floor. There was only one button on the control panel. It was labeled L3. I mean, honestly, looking back, I don't know what I was thinking. I stepped inside. The doors closed, and I felt that sinking feeling in my stomach as the lift dropped. It went down for a long time. I counted at least 40 seconds before it finally slowed to a stop. The doors opened, and the smell of fresh cut grass hit me immediately. I stepped out of the elevator, and my brain just stopped working for a second. I was standing on a concrete sidewalk. Above me wasn't a sky, but a massive curved ceiling painted a light blue. There were thousands of tiny LED lights scattered across it to look like stars. In front of me was a street. It was a perfect suburban cul-de-sac, exactly like the map showed. The houses were all two-story colonials with white siding and green shutters. Everything was perfect. The lawns were manicured, and there were even red bicycles lying in the driveways. But there was no wind. There was no sound of birds or insects. It was perfectly, unnervingly still. I walked toward the first house on the left. I noticed something off about the windows as I got closer. They weren't glass. They were high-resolution screens showing a video loop of a sunny day in a forest. I realized then that no one was living here.
I reached the front door of the house labeled Unit 1. I tried the knob and it was unlocked. I stepped inside, expecting to see a living room or a kitchen. But the interior was a replica of our mapping office back at the park headquarters. The desks, the computers, the posters on the walls, it was all identical. I walked over to the desk that should have been mine. There was a coffee mug on it that had the same chip in the rim as the one on my actual desk. I looked at the computer screen. It was logged into my personal NPS account. I felt a cold sweat break out. I checked the recent files folder on the desktop. It was a document titled Employee Replacement Protocol. I opened it. It contained a list of every person in our department. Next to my name, it had a note. Observation period ending. Initiate swap. That's when I heard a noise from the back of the house. I heard the sound of a kettle whistling in the kitchen area. I walked toward the back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I peeked around the corner of the hallway. There was someone standing at the stove. They were wearing the exact same blue flannel shirt and jeans I had on. They had my haircut. They were even humming the same song I'd been listening to in the truck. The person turned around to reach for a mug. I didn't see a face. Where their face should have been, it was just smooth, pale skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank surface that looked like it was still being molded. They stopped humming and tilted their head, as if they were listening for me. I realized then that the third level wasn't a cave or a bunker. It was a factory. And I was the template for whatever was standing in that kitchen. I didn't wait for it to move. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound on the hardwood floor. The thing in the kitchen started to walk toward the living room. Its movements were jerky, like it was learning how to use its legs. I ran out the front door and across the artificial lawn. I could hear other doors opening in the cul-de-sac. More of those blank things were stepping out onto their porches. I scrambled back into the elevator and mashed the L1 button. The doors closed just as I saw a hand with too many fingers reach for the gap. I made it back to the surface and didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I quit my job that afternoon. The weirdest part? I saw my supervisor, Greg, at the grocery store a week later. He didn't recognize me. He just stared at me with these perfectly still, glassy eyes and asked if I knew where they kept the salt. I haven't been back to the park since.
Those are the 3 accounts I have for now. Honestly, looking back at these, it makes me think twice before I go hiking anywhere remote. If you've ever found something in the woods that just felt off, let me know in the comments. I read all of them. And if you want more of these stories, go ahead and subscribe. It really helps me out. Anyway, thanks for listening. Stay safe out there.